Kelly, thanks for joining us for Wisdom Wednesday. Um, Excited to have you. Tell the Coastal Crew a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for having me. And for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Kellie Largay. I own Ace Nutrition. I reside in the state of Vermont, and my entire business is online. So within Ace Nutrition, I work with clients in a one-on-one capacity and also in small group settings, teaching them basically how to eat food to look, feel, and perform their very best.
Awesome. So what we're talking about today is labeling food as like good or bad. And I'm guilty of this, whereas I might eat over the weekend. I'm like, oh, I ate so bad. And she's like, don't worry, on Monday, I'm going to eat good. Like, I'm going to eat clean. And like, so I want to get your take on how does that affect us and our mindset and how we view food as a whole.
Yeah, so anytime that we are labeling foods as good or bad, it's almost like we're labeling, kind of like you said, Jenny, we're labeling ourselves as good or bad. And when we're sticking to that good list of foods, we feel really good about ourselves. Like we're doing an amazing job, we're succeeding, this is so great. But oftentimes what happens is it's really hard to stick to that exclusive list of good foods for a long period of time because let's face it, the foods on the bad foods list are the ones that we often want. Like they're the sweets and they're the salty things and, the things that we have at holiday get-togethers and your kids' birthday parties. So eventually you always end up working your way over to the bad foods list. And then we feel really bad about ourselves, kind of like you said, Jenny. So oftentimes it can lead to feelings of shame and guilt and embarrassment. And these feelings that come when we eat foods from the bad foods list is really detrimental to our eating habits and can really sabotage your relationship, not only with food, but also with your body.
Yeah, definitely. And then like it just makes you it feels like there's always like this cycle. So it's just like you eat bad and then you eat good and then you just like you eat bad, so you're like, well, I might as well keep eating bad. And so then it kind of just like keeps going and going and going.
It is. It's a very vicious cycle because it can kind of turn into a snowball effect where, let's say like Halloween, for example, you have 3 pieces of Halloween candy and then you're just like, oh, I've already been bad, so I'm just going to keep going. And then anytime that happens, like I mentioned before, it's going to lead to those emotions where you're just feeling really guilty, you're feeling a little bit shameful of yourself and probably a little embarrassed. And we tend to have like, I call them F it moments where it's just like, okay, screw it. I had 3 pieces. Now I'm going to have 30 pieces. And it just snowballs from there.
I've been there.
I have 2.
I heard an analogy once where it's just like if you compare kind of like eating like one bad thing is like popping a tire, would you pop the rest of the tires on your car? Just like no. So it's the same thing with eating. So you don't just say screw it, you like try to fix that tire. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And
go ahead.
something similar that I've heard is sometimes I compare it to like showering. Like most of us shower every single day, but if you skip a day, like, are you just going to say, screw it, I'm not going to shower anymore? Like, we don't do that.
Yeah, I totally get that. And then like I also find that especially with our clients, they stress out about like holidays. And so like especially with like Thanksgiving coming up, and so they associate it with like, oh well, I'm gonna eat really bad, so let me prepare by eating clean. And
Yep.
it's just like at least when I talk to them, I want to try them to shift that like bad and good to like I made not the best food choice for like my goals, or like how is this food going to make me feel or like affect my performance. How do you go about like with your clients like changing that mindset and getting them to shift from good and bad to like this is going to fuel me, I need this, or I'll treat myself but I know I'm not probably going to feel the best after.
Yeah. So that's a really great question. A lot of the clients that come to me, they have been on diets where they have like, good and bad food lists or like acceptable and unacceptable food lists. So they ask me quite often, as they're coming into my program, well, are you going to give me a list of good and bad foods? And I do provide my clients with a list of what I call superfoods. And it's just a list of like really great protein options, really great carb options, and really great fat options. And then they say, well, where's the bad food list? And I'm like, I don't have one. So it is something that I work with my clients on often, is just kind of shifting that mindset. And, food really is just fuel for our bodies. And we actually need more of it than we oftentimes think we do, especially for your clients and athletes who are very active. So something that I work with closely with my clients on is, rather than like looking at a food as something that's good or bad, look at that food and just say, how am I going to feel after I eat this? I mean, for me, like my bad food that I always used to eat all the time, like, was Oreos. And if I asked myself, like, how am I going to feel after I eat an entire sleeve of Oreos? It's never good, right? But I just couldn't think that far in advance. So I think rather than looking at food as like, okay, this food is good for me or this food is bad for me, I prefer to look at food and have my clients look at food in like, how is this food going to leave me feeling? Is it going to leave me feeling good, or is it going to leave me feeling lethargic and bloated and guilty?
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I was going to ask about, like, if you have any bad foods, but, like, you answered that question. And then you also covered elimination diets, because when you eliminate a food, then you're like, I want that food. And then you end up, like, holding off, and then, like, binging it and caving. And then we have another F it moment, and then back in the cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. And I truly believe that any food in moderation is totally fine. But the key word is moderation. Because if we go too far, we're not going to feel good. But if we're completely restricting those foods, it almost always results in a binge.
Right.
It's important to find that balance.
I know. I think people struggle with that because they just see it as good and bad, and they try to just be like crazy on one end of the spectrum or the other. There's no like happy medium.
Right. I recently took on a client who, her previous diet had given her a list of acceptable and unacceptable foods. And she said she would be like really, really good and sticking to the acceptable foods for like 1 or 2 weeks. And she would lose, like, she's like, I would lose 5 or 6 pounds in that time. But then I would binge from the unacceptable foods list and I would gain it all back. So she was hesitant to like come into my program because she was hesitant to try something new. And I'm just like, well, how did your last diet work? And she's like, it didn't. So I guess I do need something new. Yeah. I'm like, I will teach you how to include those unacceptable foods, quote unquote, into your plan.
Right. And like, that's huge, because people are, I'm like, well, is your current diet like working for you? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so why are you still doing that diet? Like, let's find something that works for you, not against you.
Exactly. Yeah. I did that for many years. I actually recently did an Instagram post on it. Like, Weight Watchers was my thing. And I'm not bashing Weight Watchers. I mean, if it works for you, then do it. But for me, I would do it, lose weight, stop, gain it back. Then I'd go back to it, lose weight, stop, gain it back. So, and for the longest time, I felt like it was working for me. But then I'm like, maybe this isn't working because I'm just doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah. I remember when I was playing rugby, I would eat like clean throughout the week, and I was kind of like obsessed with it. And then, but after games on Saturdays, I would be downing like pizza, and then we'd go out for ice cream, and I'd be like, oh, I earned this. But then on like Sunday, I would have those feelings of shame and guilt. I'm like, gosh, dang it, Jenny, like you did all this work on the weekend. But then like, if I just looked at it like, hey, I did just play 80 minutes of rugby, I can have that piece of pizza, but maybe not the third and fourth pizza, especially if we're going out for ice cream.
Yeah. And what I find with a lot of people do that, like they have like a cheat day or a splurge day. And oftentimes what I find is, like, using you as an example, like if you just allowed yourself to maybe have 1 or 2 pieces of pizza, like 2, maybe even 3 times a week, and just have the pizza in moderation, you wouldn't necessarily feel the need to like crush an entire pizza on a Saturday night, which, right. I mean, hey, I've been there too, so I'm not judging, but
yeah.
It's all about, just kind of not having that mindset, whereas like, okay, I have to get it all in today because tomorrow I'm going to be back on my diet.
Yeah. I just kind of have one last question for you. What would you tell the person who is trying to change their mindset of like, this is not good and bad, this is going to fuel my body? Like, what would you tell them about the like transition period? Because we know it's not easy trying to make that shift because you're still going to have those feelings.
Mhm. It's a process, and you have to be patient with yourself. You may be trying to unlearn a habit that you've been practicing for decades. Um, and I was the whole like clean eating during the week and then binge eating on the weekends person years ago. So I have been there, and I still have my weak moments. Like, I mean, and I'm a nutrition coach, like, and I still have to like stop and ask myself, how is that going to make me feel? And sometimes I still make the wrong decision. And then I wake up the next morning like, why did I have that extra drink? Or why did I have that fourth piece of pizza? So it's important just to know it's not going to be like a quick fix. It's not going to be linear progress. It's going to take time. You have to have a little bit of compassion for yourself, and have support. Like I think having a support system is huge.
Awesome. I love it. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.